back on the podcast. We're having a good time with Saleh, who's the author of the book I Wish I Had Before Marriage and Divorce. Mr. Zach, he's a father, he's a best-selling author, and he's an entrepreneur, and he has some important messages for you. He has these insights, he has these frameworks to help you navigate your own relational journeys. If you're dealing with these concepts like personal ownership, aligning your values, intentionality in connections, so much more. If you want these fulfilling relationships, you're going to want to sit up close and pay very close attention to Mr. Zach Saleh, author of the book I Wish I Had Before Marriage and Divorce. It's a guide that focuses on remodeling the foundational aspects of relationships. So let's get ready to get some great insights, some ahas, some maybe podcast therapy from Mr. Zach. How the heck are you, Zach?
I'm very grateful, man. It's a wild opportunity to have met you and to come across your content online. So when you're out putting yourself out there, I thought, hey, we should have a conversation. I'm excited about this.
Let's do it. Let's not be a spectator. Let's have some fun. And so tell us, like, we introduced you a little bit. We gave some kind of insight into what you're all about, what problems you can bring to light, what solutions you can provide. But what did I leave out? What's your current focus and passion? What are we talking about today?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I wrote the book more as an inner vow to myself. And, you go through trials and tribulations in life, and there's highs and lows, but sometimes in those lows, you make some crazy promises like, oh, I'll never do this again, or I'll never eat that again, or I promise to God if I get through this and I'm on the other hill across from this hill, um, maybe I'll write a book. And no matter who it's for, I'm going to do it for me. And I want this to all be for something, regardless if I sell a bazillion copies, regardless of if I ever make a dime. I don't want to waste my pain. And if there's one human that is hungry and would listen and they're coachable in the midst of being in some type of questioning around relationships in their life, this is for them. Because I wish to God someone would have just walked up to me and tapped on the microphone and just said, hey, if you really want to know what's going on, here you go. And oh, suffice it to say, we all think hindsight's 2020, but it's really not. Otherwise, we'd never repeat the same cycle, right? And so for me, it was a fulfilling of a vow, a promise to myself to go, hey, I think you're going to change the way people look at relationships, hopefully. But at the end of the day, the best way to learn something is to teach it. So I never want to experience the things that I've created for myself in my life. So I'm going to get really freaking clear and ask myself some challenging and revealing questions that are scary, but opportunistic in the outcome. So that was the motivation. That was the intention. So launched the book just this year. Publishing company was great to work with and became a bestseller online. Getting ready to do the old cliche and launch a course where if someone, I failed premarital counseling. We failed it miserably and we still got married. But we got married I got married very young and too young. I don't even think my prefrontal cortex was fully formed, nor any sense of identity, but the need to be in a partnership overdrove my sense of identity, if that makes sense. So what I ended up doing was we went through premarital counseling, and if you've ever gone through any such thing, you kind of take either a course or a mentor walks you through a few sessions and like, go get them, tiger. And then you're gonna die, emotionally speaking. No, I'm just kidding, but truly, if someone would have handed this to me before I got married or even engaged, I don't know what my life would have looked like. None of us can say, right? The whole butterfly effect. But excuse me, if couples would read this when they're looking across the table from another person and they're going, hey, I think you fit. I think we fit. I think this could be something. This is going to reveal whether or not that is true. If you're in a committed relationship, even if you're married, this is going to legitimately reveal where the landmines in your current relationship are. And it's going to be sobering. I fully believe it with all my heart that the pillars that I talk about, the four pillars, when people focus on those four pillars, it just doesn't exist. I don't know why no one's reverse engineered these four concepts. And I get that it sounds a little egotistical or arrogant to be like, I found the cure, eureka. Like, I get it. However, I'm willing to die on this hill. Um, Success leaves clues, right? And so does failure. So what I did was I jam-packed all my failures into one little concept and reverse engineered my own pain. And I thought, I wouldn't have experienced any of this failure if I had these concepts and these applications in my life and this lens in front of my eyes of my heart looking at relationships in a completely different fashion. So followed through with that. And if someone's gone through a divorce or they're in the midst of a breakup, truly, you're going to save yourself the next decade of pain of repeating that pattern or repeating that experience in any way, shape, or form if you'll answer the questions I asked in the book. Because I after we launched the book, I had a few people reach out to me and they go, I had no idea this was a workbook. It's not it's not a feel good story of fairies and dragons. It's a workbook. There's hard questions at the end of each chapter that are there intentionally, and I almost kept them out of the book. And I didn't want to spend all this time talking about a book, but they're really revealing and they're tough, and they were meant to be there. But I almost kept them out because they felt so vulnerable, because they're questions that I've asked myself. And once I got clear on these questions, it's almost as if it was kind of embarrassing to get the answer. You know, I remember there was a moment 4 years ago, 5 years ago, standing in the shower, and I just started mentally processing out loud, like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess I've never really experienced a safe, healthy, authentic, fulfilling relationship. I haven't experienced that yet. I would say the last one was, and all of a sudden I drew a blank. It's like, well, I've actually never had a safe, fulfilling, deep, meaningful relationship with a woman. Damn. And then it hit me. Oh my God. I've created every connection that I've ever been in. I am the consistent denominator everywhere I go. That was really embarrassing. And so I just began to dive past the surface of the stories that I told myself of why I've experienced what I've experienced in all my relationships since I was a teenager. I'm 40 years old, and I'm going, maybe I'm the problem and the solution, which was both radically scary and empowering at the same time, like a kick swift in the tush. Back. We got some, some rough conversations to have and some honest questions to answer, but this is going to be worth it. And so went on a deep dive of continuing therapy consistently, of looking in the mirror, of taking radical ownership over my own process and journey. And then in some way, shape, and form, documenting it along the way, not for the purpose of sharing, but for the purpose of, I'm sick and tired of experiencing this in life. I want more. So it's a really long-winded answer to answer the question of why, what led me to this.
But a long-winded answer is great, right? I'd rather that you talk than me because this is all about you and what you've discovered and what you can pass along to us. And all I can do is kind of digest it and figure out where to go because I think you've written a book for a lot of the right reasons, which is to help out your 10 years ago self. And if someone sees themselves now as you 10, 15 years ago, then they can say, hey, well, I'd rather be on the path that this guy has been where he kept on kind of coming across these failures and frustrations and drama and pain and all that stuff. And then after a while said, hey, that thinking got me there, but a better way of thinking is kind of being more, I don't know how to describe you, Zach. You're kind of like intense and aloof at the same time, and kind of introspective, and saying like, hey, there's all these situations. What's the common factor? Me. And we've all heard a lot of the, for some reason, like the pop psychology is more mainstream, right? You hear some of these terms now. You hear about the narcissism, the gaslighting, the triggering, the emotional intelligence, right? You hear these terms, you hear about boundaries, but then it's like kind of painful to go into that, right? It's scary to see a marriage counselor. It's scary to like take a class to do some of this deep digging. And some of these relationships that you mentioned, like sometimes we just kind of get stuck in the momentum, right? Like, I
Yeah.
know this person. I guess we'll go on a date. We've been going on a date. Guess we'll get in a relationship. I guess you might as well get married. And then next thing you know, you're not where you want to be, which is, and as you said in your book, sometimes the marriage has to end. And you said that people might be at different parts in the journey, right? About to get married, currently married, about to get divorced. And so what really intrigued me was you mentioned about these four pillars. And that's the good stuff, right? When we say, well, I've heard all this stuff and it hasn't worked, but here's something new. Maybe this
Yeah.
will work for me. What are those four pillars about? How can they help people?
Yeah. That's really good, man. Um, I love what you said about pop psychology. If there's one vendetta I have, it's that everyone's ex is a narcissist. And um, yeah, it's easy. I think if people are honest with themselves, it's easy to look and go, here's how my partner has wronged me. And here's how, which might all be true. Let's pretend I want to help people with conflict management. I'm like, let's pretend everything you just said was accurate, 100% across the board. They're a villain. What does that make you? And eventually they'll get to the language of, well, I'm the victim here. I'm like, yeah, you're committed to being a victim. And people that experience real pain, they don't want to hear that, right? Because it reveals our powerlessness. It reveals our commitment to remain in that state. And people don't, they're afraid of their power. They're afraid of losing the ability and the permission slip to stand by idly and go, "Ah, you see, all this is happening to me. They're terrible. Look at this." And then all of a sudden that becomes their identity. And there's this moment in time that no one can gift you but yourself. And it's really freaking frustrating because it's easier to convince someone they're a victim than it is to help them see they perceive themselves as a victim. So I'll clean that up. It's easier to convince someone they're a victim than it is to convince them they've been deceived. So anyway, all that being said, I think a lot of things in life could be solved, especially in relationships, with a healthy dose of radical ownership. That's probably one of my favorite books is Extreme Ownership, and he could have summarized everything in one chapter. Everything's your fault. um, Bad things happen to you, right? We can't negate that. We can't stop that from happening. So stop trying. But what you can do is dictate your response to other people in the circumstance that you're in. So, in essence, you're a co creator of your life. If I was just creating everything that I experienced, no questions asked, then I would be a billionaire and we wouldn't have this conversation. And I would never experience any pain because I wouldn't want that for myself. But in reality, we're co creating constantly with people around us. And so one plus one equals two in our minds. But in reality, like you can solve what you bring to the equation, right? So anytime I tell someone that are in a relationship and they just want to run to what their partner is doing, I go, great, let's get it all out. Let's get it all out. Let's say everything you're just saying is true. Now what? Now what about you? What do you bring to the table? So we go into the four pillars and we talk about just four concepts, four things to focus on in a relationship that um, if you're willing to be obsessive and clear with these four pillars, the relationship will make itself sustainable. It will make itself clear whether or not it is a worthy keepsake in your life. And those four pillars are conflict management, in no particular order: conflict management skills, expectations, values, and chemistry. Now, we base the majority of our pursuit of relationships today on what I call toxic chemistry, the repetition of mom and dad's model of love. Love. And so we go like, hey, like, what are your, I call them the three C's. Like, what's your circumstance? What's our chemistry? And what do we have in common? That's kind of how today's society has gotten to a 60+% divorce rate, right? Over the course of 20 plus years. So I'm going, well, chemistry is really important to a relationship. They call it the roommate phase. When you realize there's no chemistry anymore, we are cohabitating. We're barely getting our natural needs met, yet alone our emotional ones. There's no longer this push pull. It's mostly just push, right? We're like, that's good, Jan. Thanks. Don't touch me. And she's over here going like, I can't get anything done. I can't count on you, etc. And all of a sudden there's like this reverse roles in the relationship. And he's in his feminine and she's in her masculine, or whatever the case may be. But the chemistry's been lost. And that pillar has to be uh, built upon. That fire has to be stoked constantly, where we forget that we are constantly to hunt our partner. We are to pursue them, to woo them. And that looks differently than what today's dating culture rewards. And so we talk about the how did we get here in chemistry, and then how to reverse engineer the healthy version of that in a relationship. Um, I talk to men, like, you should never stop chasing down your woman. Never stop flirting with her like your life depends on it. Like, I don't care what the outcome is, sweetheart, is, but you mine, right? Getting into that woo, that playful banter, that not so outcome driven, and inviting ladies. Hey, when's the last time you were intentional in the same manner? When's the last time you tried to seduce your man conversationally? Whatever it looks like for you. But stoking that fire gets you lost in the present moment, which is quite sustainable, right? So we got chemistry. We focus on chemistry as a pillar. Pursue the crap out of your partner. Don't stop. Stop. We call it fat cat syndrome in sales. When you make a big sale, it's almost like people just retire emotionally. They let off the gas and like, well, I know, we're going to take the next 100 days off and just screw around because we deserve a break. People do that relationally and they don't even realize it. I know, I won. I got my partner. We got this white picket fence life, whatever. I'm over it. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to coast. It's like, see you in 3 years when you're divorced. If your partner and you do not have the same desired outcome in the relationship, you will come to a crossroads. What is your purpose? At least get clear with one another. What is the desired purpose of this relationship? And some people will just tattletale on themselves and they don't even question what they say. Oh, I don't know. I just want to have kids, enjoy life, share the experience. It's like, no, Carl, that's a recipe for disaster. If there's not a purpose in the relationship. So, what I invite people to look at, even in cultivating chemistry, is getting clear on the purpose of your relationship. Is, hey, would you consider that your partner is a really good source of feedback for you? And they are going to be a spitting mirror of how you show up. Granted, they might have their narratives attached to that feedback of, I can't stand it when you do this thing, or you breathe this way, or you eat this way. But sometimes they're going to come to you with useful feedback. And this relationship is now your growth hormone. It is now an opportunity to look in the mirror and go, crap, I didn't realize that's how I show up. Okay. This is a conduit for growth. That's how I'm going to treat this relationship, regardless of the outcome. If people would adopt that, Robert, I mean, that's 15% of the divorce right there. Just the paradigm shift of looking at a romantic relationship as an opportunity for growth. Gracious. So I digress. Moving on from chemistry, we go right into conflict management. Okay, well, typically you don't have conflict management until you're kind of engaged in some type of committed relationship, right? It's like, why would I mess with conflict management unless you're sticking around? Like, I don't need to mess with it. But 9 times out of 10, we're doing conflict management wrong and we're not curious. Um, we have a few different acronyms, but the most simple one I'll share is DNA. In conflict management, we teach DNA is data, narrative, and ask. So the next time you and your lady get in a conflict, I want you to approach her with curiosity instead of your pissed off narrative. And usually there's sadness or anger, right, when we have a charge against our partner. We're like, ugh, you did this, and so it means that. And so I feel this way, right? Get a little animated, forgive me. And so I want you to go to your partner with this. Hey, when you did this or you said that, it's the data. When you did XYZ, or you slammed the door, or you said, not tonight, I don't want to go out, whatever it is, state your data with no sauce, just the data as if we were reading a report. And then I want you to share and take ownership of your narrative, which is if you've ever watched a movie with a narrator or read a book, it's like you're from the back end being objective. You're hearing someone's take on the scenario. What you're doing is you're revealing your take on the scenario. We're all assigning machines. So DNA, data, narrative, ask. Own your narrative. Regardless if you think it's correct and true, like, well, how else am I supposed to interpret that? 80% of communication is nonverbal. You're being a bitch. Right? And so it's like, maybe so, but own your narrative. Hey, when you said XYZ, I interpreted it as this. Hey, when you said you didn't want to go out tonight, I interpreted it as my story in my head, and I encourage people to use this language. My story in my head is that you're just not interested in connecting today. And then emotion. I feel sad about that. I feel disconnected. Can you help me understand or get clear around that? Because I want to understand like what your response is actually coming from. Before you make your ask, get freaking curious. So DNA, we got our data, the thing they did, narrative. We took ownership and responsibility of our translation. Ask, that's an invitation. Hey, I want to understand what's going on. Is there a different way you'd like to connect today? So that's kind of conflict management, just a little skim off the top of that pillar, right? And so once a couple can experience conflict in a safe manner, my God, the repairability factor is so much higher. Conflict is a gift to a relationship. It is showing, hey, we both want to connect or want to connect, and there's an opportunity to, and this is revealing where it's off. So I think conflict is a gift. It's always revealing something that's going beyond the surface. My old friends used to say, Zach, there's no deeper meaning. To which I say, there's always a deeper meaning. So we've got chemistry, conflict management, and then expectations. In the book, I call it expectations as an umbrella. Bids, boundaries, and booty calls fall underneath the expectations. I hear some gurus say, like, hey, just don't have expectations. You'll be fine. Never be disappointed. And I think that's the trashiest advice you could ever hear or give, because you should have expectations. You should vocalize and take responsibility for those expectations and manage them as things go along. So if you say to me, hey, Zach, our call's at 10:30, you set a clear expectation. And when I show up at 10:45, you have now permission to go, hey, can you tell me what's going on? Like, I set a clear expectation. You agreed to that expectation. Now we're engaging in conflict. In relationships, if I actually, oh my God, I interviewed this mediator. I took a mediator course. This was fascinating just to learn mediation. And she said, Zach, if people would actually have an exhaustive conversation on the front end of their relationship and just get clear about every physical scenario that you could ever experience in a relationship. Hey, what are we going to do when your mother gets sick? What are we going to do if something happens to our kid? And she just went through the list. I said, you need to make a list of this because this could really help couples. But we avoid those conversations because we go, I don't know, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And then all of a sudden it's like, now we're engaging in conflict. There are two reasons that people have conflict in a relationship. Only two. I'll I mean, it's an oversimplification, but I'll die on this hill. Please come prove me wrong. It's one of two reasons. It's either your values are in conflict, which I'll share next, or your expectations weren't managed. Every issue in a relationship comes down to those two things: expectations or values and conflict. So expectations, we talk about what's the power of bids. What's a bid? It's when a partner wants to connect with you in some way, shape, or form. Could be looking at a bird, could be flirting, could be eye contact. It's anything. But understanding the power of bids. Boundaries. Your boundary is not an ask. Your boundary is your response to someone else's action. They say boundaries are where the gate is. It's not a wall to build up. An ask is, hey, if you could, I'd appreciate it if you put the throw pillows on the bed. A boundary is, hey, when you throw the pillows on the floor, I'm no longer going to make the bed. You're now responsible for that. What you're doing is you're no longer outsourcing your power. An ask is inviting someone to do something. A boundary is, here's my response, not as a threat, but as, if this XYZ takes place, here's my action that I'm going to take. And they're only as good as their enforcement, right? We, we know that in like state lines or like country borders, right? It's not really a boundary if it's not enforced, right? It doesn't really count. So you say like, don't step on my toe, and you just hold still and you keep letting people step on your toes. You're to blame, not them, right? And that kind of goes back to that ownership victim versus ownership paradigm. So bids, boundaries, and booty calls. The importance of initiating intimacy and what that looks like for one another, and getting clear on what's good and ugly and bad and fun in that aspect. I mean, I don't I don't know why, but in couples therapy, we're not reverting back to the individual consistently. I believe all marital issues are an issue of the individuals in that relationship. So the relationship is just revealing that issue. You know what I mean? So it's not like, oh, there's one person to blame. It's like, no, 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 you're both contributing to something, but you have to look at it on an individual basis. And if we took a snapshot of our intimacy with our partner, it's likely an indicator or a dramatic version of the emotional state of our relationship. And we kind of dive into that on a few pages in that chapter around bids, boundaries, and booty calls. Hashtag expectations. Lastly, the fourth pillar. So we got chemistry, we got expectations, we have conflict management, and the last one's values. Right. Values are the reverse engineered characteristic that caused you a shitload of pain. You can beep that out if you need to. But so if I asked you, hey, what's your favorite characteristic in someone? You can name it for me. And I go, how does that show up in action? Like if you say, hey, Zach, I value on, oh, give me one of your favorite characteristics of your closest friends right now.
Right now,
Oh,
I
you're not
mean, communicative, friendly.
communicative or friendly. And when they're communicative, how does that show up in action? Is it that they talk a lot? What is it?
Yeah, talk, sharing, open, honest.
Open, honest. Okay. So they're open, they're honest, they're communicative. You feel like that's friendly?
Yeah, I mean, who's coming to mind? I have this friend, and she lives with her dad, who's old, and it kind of frustrates her. So I get the unvarnished truth. I hear about some real stuff and some real drama that's going on. There's no being careful. There is like, hey, here's how I'm feeling. Here's the problem I'm going through.
Mm. And so you trust that. You feel safer with that. You feel more connected when you experience that dynamic in a relationship.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Honesty is great.
Honesty. Very good. So what you just named was a characteristic and how it shows up in action. So what we would do is we'd place one of your top 5 or 10 values as honesty. And so once we went through and got clear on all your values, I have a handful of questions that I have people answer that'll kind of trick them into releasing some truth that they didn't realize that really actually mattered to them. Once you get clear on your values and how they show up in action, Then we talk about how to live from that space, which creates authenticity in your life. And authenticity, to get weird on you, is the highest frequency that we can embody in our bodies. It's not peace, it's not joy, it's not love, it's authenticity. And so living from your values is actually a reversal of the pain, the emotional pain that you've experienced in your life. And when you and your partner get clear on your values, and maybe you have one or two, or that awesome if you have more than one, how those show up in action that overlap with one another, that's amazing. You should double down on that value and go, this is why I like you. This is why you're my people. This is why I trust you. But also getting clear on what you value versus what they value. Understand that when they show up in that, when they don't show up in that value and they're showing the antithesis of that thing. So for example, one of my values is transparency. And when I find out something that's going on that could have been proactively shared and it's new information and I don't really like, I'm like, can you just proactively tell me what the data is so I don't have to find out on my own or ask 40 questions? Then I feel like an asshole, right? So if my quote partner shows up in a lack of transparency and they're kind of withholding, I get really activated. And I have to like check my ego. I'm like, okay, not everyone's out to deceive you, Zach, but this is a dear value of mine. So I invite my partner to at least honor my values, right? They don't have to share them or like have that exact same value of transparency, but one of my top 5 values is transparency. And so I invite my partner to go, hey, can you honor that? That'd mean the world to me. So one of our sources of conflict in a partnership would be the lack of that transparency. So values are not this. They are not morals. They are not an entity. Oh, we really care about our faith or our religion, or we care about our family. That is not a value. A value is a characteristic. Values are not commonalities. Like she likes yoga, I like pickleball. Like you like hummus, I love baba ganoush. Like that's not a value, right? But people mistake commonalities, entities, morals for values, and it drives me bonkers. And no one's talking about it. So I'm a little bit obsessed with once I walk someone through a values conversation, takes anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. Your life is never going to look the same. I promise you, because it's like putting a lens up to your eye where you've never had so much clarity. It's going to reveal a huge amount of the conflict you have in relationships, the relationships you should let go of that you're not because you're living out of integrity with yourself, etc. That is a synopsis of the 4 pillars landing the plane in the book. So you've got the chemistry, the conflict management, you get the values, you got the expectations. What I did was I took all my war stories, all my pain, all the landmines I stepped on, and I reverse engineered or oversimplified what I consider to be some of the wisest advice out there by the Gottman Institute. They talk about the 4 horsemen of a
Oh yeah.
relationship. You got resentment, stonewalling, etc., criticism. And I thought, well, what causes those things? Because those are symptomatic. Those are things that we can slip into. What causes resentment? What causes stonewalling? What causes criticism or resentment? So once I got clear on that, I was like, I'm gonna put this in baby food terms. And if we can just get obsessive on these 4 things, your relationship with your partner is you're never going to look at it the same. Thus, your relationship will never be the same. Once you got the dose of truth, now you're responsible for it. So if you take out the romance aspect, you'd be down to just expectations and values. And now we can go into any corporate world and go, hey, your problem with your leadership is these 2 issues. You want to recruit and build your recruiting agency for your C-level executive suite, recruit for values, train for skill. So that's the kind of the next step where we're going with this message is now that we got the book published, getting ready to launch the course, going to go after entrepreneurs and people that want to either have a partnership in business or they want to recruit leadership into their company through the lens of values. And when they do that, there's no ceiling. It's just going to change the game. So I feel like I honored a promise to myself, wrote the book, put it out there. It's not perfect, but the content is there. It's just all meat. There's no sugar. There's no sauce. It's just meat. Sorry, vegans. Anyway, but yeah, I'm looking forward to interviewing people that are finishing it right now. They're answering the hard questions at the end of each chapter. Anyway, they're tangibly remodeling their own foundation, if you will, and then moving on to how this applies in the business world. So,
Well,
yeah,
very cool. Well,
yeah.
you figured a lot of things out. You've got this unique, imperfect take based on what you've seen, and you've digested in the lived experiences and how you can do better moving on. And it seems like a lot of what you're mentioning here, and like, yeah, the four pillars: chemistry, values, conflict, and expectations. There is a lot of like, if we're not aware of these patterns that we have, we'll just keep repeating them, and
Mhm.
we'll find ourselves always like bulldozing over others, being bulldozed over by either the other person or by just life circumstances, and we don't want that, right? We want a little bit more of mapping out the terrain and just knowing like, hey, here's why I act this way, here's how it goes through my values. This is all some really powerful stuff. And so you've said so much, and I'm still like thinking all of it through, and we only have a few minutes left. We want to send people to the book. We want people to still be kind of excited and thirsty about what the possibilities are and what can be accomplished. So in our last couple of minutes here, like, what surprised you about this whole journey? Because there's all these, like problem solving methods and all these keywords and all these questions. But what about you? Did you think like, oh my gosh, like this changes my whole perspective?
Mm. Yeah, by the time you publish a book, you've read it 100 times and you hate it. And I can't
Okay.
agree with that more. I'm getting ready to go record in January the audio myself, and I always wanted to do that. Always wanted to do like voice acting or whatever. But um, yeah, one of the funny experiences is the kind of getting sick and tired of hearing your own thoughts and your own voice. But it's interesting, yeah, writing a book makes you have to face what you actually believe. And then where's fluff? Where's the BS, right? There's a lot of things that I deleted out of this that I thought, this isn't serving. This doesn't actually bring any traction or clarity. It's just my ego or my insecurity trying to make me more likable. Excuse me, not out of like deceiving anyone, but out of just sharing, just oversharing. And it's like that doesn't help them. It's about you. So it's not about you. It's about them. Um, so yeah, when I share the concepts, especially of values and expectations, I realize, oh my God, like I've really using your term earlier, I've really gaslit myself. Like, gosh, this thing keeps happening in my relationships and relationships I see everywhere. These two things keep happening. And I found gold. Like there's some divers off the coast of Florida just this week that were like, they came out and announced they just found gold. It's like, we've lived here a few minutes in America. Like we're still finding gold. And so I thought, that's kind of true, right? Gosh, okay, maybe there is some wisdom and insight here. And it doesn't define my value as a man, as a human being, or my identity, but there's something worth sharing here. And what it's done is it's maybe reinforced my belief in when you wrestle with something fully, um, and you're objective and you're willing to threaten your own belief systems around certain things, like that's worthy of sharing. You should share that, not as an absolute truth, but as a, hey, would you come and test this with me? Like, would you poke holes in this idea? I have this idea that relationships can like flourish if these ingredients are in the recipe at all times. I don't care what else you add, but as long as you keep these ingredients in the recipe, there's like 18 ways to make chocolate chip cookies. My brother, I mean, we all have a specific taste, but damn, you gotta have a few ingredients every time, right?
Right.
I believe the same way about sustainable relationships. If you have these key ingredients, it'll always be good.
That's a nice analogy that there is like a infinite ways of going wrong, and there's like a handful of finite ways of going correct. So you have a little bit of freedom there, but you still need to have those essentials in place. And there's always just some new insights that can be discovered. I mean, so it sounds like you've sorted out the ideas, because there's this idea of, like you said, you're going to narrate the audiobook. When we were kids, we hate hearing our voice on a recording, right? We're like, I
I
don't sound
hate it,
like that.
man. Same.
Yeah, and we've all gone through that phase, and some people are still stuck there, right? They see, and especially in this day and age of like the influencer marketing and the TikToks and the YouTube, like if you want to be a thought leader, you want to be on LinkedIn, you could sort of have to have your own video. You want to be a podcaster, you have to be on video. And so a lot of people won't even get past that first step, right? They won't even do the tiniest bit of like introspection, go through the pain and then use it. And then once you do and you see what you're putting out there, you're like, okay, well, now I'm getting clear on what my ideas are. But then also there's an element of, well, what doesn't fit and what don't I want to overshare and what can people. So I'm left with this blend of like, here's what's personal, but here's what's also helpful. And so we need to go through that sort of process. And you've gone through that as far as figuring out this kind of relationship, marriage advice, even though, I mean, who knows how many books are about relationships, right? I mean, maybe even more than weight loss, right? And but there's still these
Yeah.
new insights to be had. And you've also, to your credit, not invented all this new stuff, right? You could have said, oh my gosh, here's this term and that term. You're like, hey, values, expectations, I say that, you know what I mean, and we can unpack that idea, but it's still accessible. And this book is the book I wish I had before marriage and divorce. Remodeling the Foundation That Relationships Are Built Upon by Zach Saleh, and published by Game Changer Publishing. We love them. We love Chris Colley. And you can find Zach on Amazon. First name Zach, last name Saleh. Are there any other calls to action here? Is there any other social media or website to find out more about you, your business, and your book?
Just a couple. The domain that we're getting ready to launch the course on is thebookiwishihad.com. Like you said, the Amazon site has the book. I have a little TikTok account. I don't have many followers, but we're just starting to kind of ramp that up at Zach Saleh. You'll see my mug on there. But yeah, that's about it, man. So I invite anyone to ever DM me a question, shoot me a comment. If you have like a legitimate, like, hey, what about this? What about that? Poke holes in it. I love it when people, not for the sake of arguing, but for the sake of clarity, that are going, hey, I'm really curious about this. Tell me more about this. And I don't have a PhD, right? I don't have a PhD in psychology, other than just I've pursued my own inner journey, if you will, through as many facets as I've been able to get my hands on, whether it be therapy, shadow work, you name the modality, I've probably gone down it, or, yeah, tried to get certified in it. So it's just been an oversimplification of my own heart journey and inviting people into that same posture. So I'm grateful to have shared this space with you, my friend.
And I'm grateful to have learned from you. We can always use more techniques. You maybe flash back a little bit to when the wife and I first went to marriage counseling. She gave us each the same sheet of paper that said, and it was all these exercises about making I statements, which is huge, right? Radical ownership, having your boundaries, and even some of the advice she shared on our conversation today, like conflict management, DNA, data, narrative, ask. I mean, that gets us some initial wins, right? Just being like, hey, I've been falling into these same unhealthy, destructive patterns and habits. I could use some new techniques. You apply them, and then that leads to some other breakthroughs. And that's what we want from the book I wish I had.com, Zach Saleh. And as we're writing down our conversation, it's soundbite time. And I'm sure you have some, because you're a thought leader, you're an author here, Zach. I like to try to stump my guest a little bit and ask them about a quote or lesson that has served them in the past that they can pass on to us. I know we've already talked about like 52 and a half lessons, but what comes to mind as far as our grand finale of our conversation, quote or lesson? What has helped you that you think can help us?
One of my favorite quotes by Carl Jung is, unless a man faces his pain, he will make for himself one that is much greater. And another quote that I'll give is a poem by E. Cummings. And it says, I never saw a wild thing sorry for itself. A wild bird will fall frozen from a bough before ever feeling sorry for itself. And I thought, And I didn't realize until years later it is really just about the posture of being a victim and self pity. And I thought, well, there's two sides of the coin of healing. There's empathy, there's ownership. You need both. You have to have both. And when we deploy empathy to other people without inviting them into ownership, we're enabling them. When we look in the mirror and we just give ourselves all the ownership, it's all my fault, but we're not willing to deploy compassion towards ourselves and our ignorance, we're missing the mark. So, unless a man faces pain, I mean, good Lord, the answer to most of our problems is inside of our pain. It's reverse engineering that our painful event we experienced years ago created an online belief system that is now driving the train. And now it's at war with us.
Well, time to write the train, right? Time to get on a different track or speed it up, slow it down, do what needs to be done with
Derail the
empathy
mother trucker.
and with well, if that's what's necessary to be done, then so be it. So
Yeah.
empathy and ownership, confront the problem, have this new perspective, and you can begin that new perspective by going to thebookiwishihad.com. That's the book I wish I had before marriage and divorce by Zach Saleh. Mind blowing. Wonderful speaking with you today, friend.
Yes. Really appreciate the opportunity and the invitation. Let's do it again.